All right, folks, welcome back to the Deep Dive. A special shout out to all our listeners gearing up for those UPSC exams. Those diving into the fascinating world of modern Indian history.
Absolutely.
This is part 2 of our series, and today
Part two.
we're going deep into the life and legacy of a figure often hailed as the father of the Indian Renaissance,
Big title.
Raja Rammohan Roy.
Yeah, it's a title that carries a lot of weight, and as we unpack the material you've sent in, I think you'll see why.
I think so too.
Yeah.
What's fascinating about Raja Rammohan Roy is that his story isn't just about one man, it's about a pivotal moment in Indian history. It's about the clash between tradition and modernity, the birth of new ideas, and the struggle for a more just and equitable society.
I like that.
Okay, so we're talking about 19th century India, a time of immense change and upheaval. Where does Raja Rammohan Roy fit into all of this?
He's right at the heart of it. Born in Bengal in 1772, Roy was a product of this turbulent era, but also a driving force behind many of its most significant transformations. What's striking is his early intellectual curiosity. This is someone who was fluent in Persian, Sanskrit, and Arabic.
Wow, talk about a foundation for bridging cultures. How did this multilingual upbringing shape his worldview?
It's crucial. It allowed him to navigate different religious and philosophical traditions, drawing inspiration from Islamic monotheism, Vedantic philosophy, that's a system of thought rooted in ancient Hindu scriptures called the Vedas, and even Western Enlightenment ideals.
So we're seeing the seeds of his reformist spirit taking root in his diverse education.
Exactly, and these seeds begin to sprout with his early writing. In 1803, he published Tufat Muwahhidin, which translates to A Gift to Deists.
Okay.
In it, he critiques what he saw as irrational beliefs and rituals within Hinduism, advocating for a more rational and unified understanding of God.
He's not shying away from challenging the status quo, even at a young age. What specific practices did he target?
He questioned idol worship,
Okay.
elaborate rituals, and even some aspects of the caste system, arguing that they went against the core principles of a monotheistic faith.
So this was radical stuff for the time.
Oh, absolutely. This was radical.
So he's laying the groundwork for what would become his signature contribution to religious reform, the Brahmo Samaj.
Precisely. Founded in 1828,
Okay.
the Brahmo Samaj was a revolutionary movement that rejected idol worship, ritualism, and the caste system outright.
Wow.
They advocated for a monotheistic understanding of God, emphasizing reason and morality over blind faith.
That's a huge departure from traditional Hinduism.
Yeah.
What kind of impact did this have on the religious landscape of the time?
It sent shockwaves through society. Think about it. The caste system was deeply entrenched in Indian society, defining social hierarchies for centuries.
Right.
By rejecting it, Roy was striking at the very heart of the existing social order.
That's a bold move, especially in the context of early 19th century India.
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder, did he face any opposition?
Of course.
Yeah.
He faced intense criticism from Orthodox Hindus, who saw him as a threat to their traditions and authority. But Roy was undeterred. He believed in the power of reason and dialogue to bring about change.
So he's challenging religious orthodoxy,
Yeah.
but his reformist zeal doesn't stop there.
Right.
Right? I mean, we've also got his work on social reform, particularly his campaign against Sati.
Absolutely. This is where Roy's commitment to social justice becomes truly apparent.
Yeah.
For those who might not know, Sati was a horrifying practice where widows were expected to immolate themselves on their husbands' funeral pyres.
A practice deeply rooted in patriarchal traditions and a complete disregard for a woman's life.
Exactly, and Roy saw it as a barbaric custom that needed to be abolished.
Yeah.
He launched a tireless campaign against Sati, writing articles, giving speeches, and mobilizing public opinion against it.
It must have taken immense courage to challenge such a deeply ingrained social practice.
It did. He faced intense opposition from conservative forces who saw Sati as a sacred tradition. But Roy was unwavering in his conviction that it was a cruel and unjust practice that had no place in a civilized society.
So he's taking on religious orthodoxy, advocating for women's rights. Is there anything this guy didn't do?
Well, his contributions extend far beyond just those two areas. Let's not forget his incredible efforts in promoting modern education in India. He understood that for India to progress, it needed to embrace new ideas and equip its citizens with the knowledge and skills to navigate a rapidly changing world.
Okay, so we're seeing this multifaceted reformer who's not just critiquing existing systems, but actively working to build a better future for India. How did he approach this idea of modern education?
He believed in the power of blending the best of Western and Indian knowledge systems. He saw value in both scientific rationality and traditional wisdom.
Hmm. This is where his multilingual background and understanding of different philosophical traditions must have really come into play.
Absolutely. He was fluent in Sanskrit, Persian, and Arabic, and had studied the religious texts of different religions and philosophies, which gave him a unique perspective. He was instrumental in establishing institutions like the Hindu College in 1817, which introduced Western science and philosophy to Indian students.
Okay.
He also founded the Anglo-Hindu School in 1822, further emphasizing a more modern, rational approach to learning.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the Vedanta College in 1825, which aimed to bridge Indian philosophy with Western science.
Wow, he's not just advocating for education.
No.
He's actively creating institutions that embody his vision of a modern, well-rounded curriculum.
He's not just talking the talk, he's walking the walk, and this dedication to educational reform would have a profound impact on shaping the intellectual landscape of 19th century India.
All right, so we have this picture of Raja Rammohan Roy as this incredible religious and social reformer, a pioneer of modern education, and a champion of women's rights. But his influence doesn't stop there, does it?
Not at all. He was also a visionary political thinker,
Wow.
engaging with the complexities of British rule in India and advocating for reforms that would shape the trajectory of the nation.
Now we're getting into some really interesting territory. So how did he navigate the political landscape of his time? What were some of his key ideas and contributions in this realm?
Well, remember, we're talking about the early 19th century, a time when British influence in India was expanding rapidly.
Right.
Roy recognized the inherent flaws in the existing system and began advocating for reforms within the framework of the British Raj.
Okay.
He wasn't calling for outright revolution at this stage,
Right.
but he was pushing for greater Indian participation in their own governance and for policies that would benefit the Indian people.
So a pragmatic approach, working within the system to bring about change.
Exactly.
What were some of the specific reforms he advocated for?
He called for the Indianization of services, arguing for greater inclusion of Indians in administrative roles within the British Raj. This was a direct challenge to the prevailing notion that Indians were incapable of governing themselves and needed to be ruled by the British. He also stressed the importance of separating the executive and judiciary branches of government, a key principle of democratic governance that would ensure checks and balances on power.
So he's advocating for a more representative and accountable system of governance,
Yeah.
even within the colonial framework.
Yeah.
That's pretty radical for the time.
It is, and his vision extended beyond just political structures.
Okay.
He was also deeply concerned with economic issues, particularly the plight of the peasantry in Bengal, who were often exploited by wealthy landowners called zamindars.
Zamindars, for those of us who aren't familiar with the term, were essentially landlords who held vast tracts of land and collected taxes from the farmers who worked it.
Exactly, and Roy saw how this system often led to abuse and exploitation,
Right.
with the zamindars accumulating wealth at the expense of the farmers. He criticized the exploitative taxation practices of the zamindars and demanded reforms such as minimum rent regulations to protect the interests of the farmers.
He's not just a political theorist. He's deeply concerned with the social and economic realities of the people.
Absolutely. He's a reformer in the truest sense of the word, always looking for ways to improve the lives of ordinary people. And this commitment to social justice extended to his views on freedom of the press. He was a passionate advocate for a free and independent press, believing that it was essential for societal progress and democratic values.
That's right. He wasn't just talking about press freedom. He was actively shaping public discourse through his own publications. I mean, he founded several influential newspapers and journals like Brahmanical Magazine, Samvad Kaumudi, and Marat ul Akbar, right?
Exactly. He was a prolific writer and editor, using the power of the press to disseminate his ideas, challenge orthodoxy, and engage in public debate on a wide range of issues. He understood the importance of a well-informed citizenry in holding power accountable and driving social change.
This is incredible. Raja Rammohan Roy really comes across as this multifaceted, forward-thinking individual who was deeply invested in shaping a better future for India. His contributions span religion, social reform, education, politics, economics, and even media. It's hard to imagine a more influential figure in 19th century India.
He was truly a remarkable individual, a true pioneer who laid the groundwork for many of the transformative changes that would unfold in India over the coming decades. His story is a testament to the power of ideas to shape a nation's destiny and the enduring impact one person can have in challenging the status quo and pushing for progress.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm eager to delve even deeper into Raja Rammohan Roy's ideas and their lasting legacy.
Me too.
But for now, we're going to
Yeah.
take a quick break. When we come back, we'll explore his views on religion and rationalism in more detail, and then we'll discuss his lasting impact on various aspects of Indian society. So stick around, folks. We'll be right back.
We'll be right back. Now, picking up where we left off, let's delve a little deeper into Raja Rammohan Roy's religious and philosophical views because they were really quite revolutionary for his time.
I'm particularly fascinated by his ability to blend tradition with progressive thought, especially when it came to religion. It seems like he was able to draw from multiple sources, multiple traditions, to arrive at a more, I don't know, universal understanding of faith.
That's a great observation. He was deeply influenced by Vedantic philosophy, Islamic monotheism, and even some aspects of Christian thought, which is fascinating in itself, given the historical context.
Yeah, and for someone living in 19th century India, that's quite a mix. It makes me wonder if he saw these different traditions as being in conflict with each other or as potentially complementary.
Well, for Roy, it was all about seeking a universal truth, a common thread that ran through all these seemingly diverse faiths.
Okay.
He believed in the inherent unity of all religions and saw a monotheistic belief in a single formless God as being at the core of this unity.
Okay, so he's stripping away the rituals, the dogma, the cultural trappings that often divide religions, and focusing on a more essential unifying principle.
Exactly. He felt that many of the elaborate rituals and practices that had become associated with Hinduism were actually barriers to true spiritual understanding.
Okay.
They were distractions from the core message of a monotheistic faith.
And that must have been quite controversial at the time. I mean, to challenge the rituals and traditions that had been a part of Indian culture for centuries.
It was a bold move, and it certainly ruffled some feathers.
Yeah.
He was accused of being a heretic, of undermining traditional Hindu beliefs. But Roy was undeterred. He believed in the power of reason and rational inquiry, and he felt that true spirituality should be intertwined with a constant pursuit of knowledge and understanding.
So it wasn't just about blind faith for him.
No.
It was about engaging with your faith on an intellectual and ethical level.
Exactly.
That's a pretty modern perspective, even by today's standards.
It is. He was a true pioneer in that sense, advocating for a more reasoned and ethical approach to religion. And this commitment to reason and social justice wasn't just confined to the realm of religious thought.
Right.
It was a core principle that drove his work in various other areas, particularly his advocacy for women's rights.
And speaking of women's rights, I think that's a topic that really deserves its own deep dive,
Absolutely.
especially given the context of 19th century India.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already talked about his campaign against Sati, but his contributions to women's rights go far beyond that.
Absolutely. His advocacy for women's rights was comprehensive.
Okay.
He championed widow remarriage, which was a radical concept at the time given the societal norms that often condemned widows to a life of isolation and hardship.
Right.
He also fought tirelessly for girls' education, arguing that an educated woman was essential for the progress of society as a whole. And he wasn't afraid to take on the patriarchal norms that denied women economic independence, advocating for their right to property and inheritance.
This is where I really start to see the connection between his religious views and his social activism.
Yeah.
He's challenging the traditional interpretations of religious texts that were often used to justify the subjugation of women.
You're absolutely right. He was constantly questioning the status quo, pushing back against interpretations of religious texts that he felt were unjust or harmful. He believed that true religion should be a force for liberation, for empowering individuals, not for oppressing them.
Right.
And this was particularly true when it came to his vision of a more just and equitable society for women.
So he had this picture of a man who's challenging religious orthodoxy, advocating for women's rights, pioneering modern education. It's really quite an impressive list of accomplishments.
It is.
But I'm curious, how were his ideas received by the people around him? Did he have a following? Did he face resistance?
Well, as you can imagine, he was a polarizing figure. He had a devoted following who were inspired by his vision of a more progressive and just India.
Yeah.
But he also faced intense opposition from those who felt threatened by his ideas.
Oh.
Those who saw him as a dangerous radical who was undermining tradition and social order.
That makes sense. Anytime someone challenges the status quo, there's bound to be pushback.
For sure.
But it seems like he was able to make a real impact, despite the resistance he faced.
He did. His ideas planted the seeds for many of the social and political reforms that would unfold in India over the coming decades. He inspired generations of reformers and nationalists who continued his work pushing for social change, political independence, and a more inclusive vision of India.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah.
We've talked about his religious views, his social activism, his contributions to education, and the resistance he faced.
We have.
But I think it's important to step back for a moment and consider the broader context of his work. What was it about the time period he lived in that made his ideas so revolutionary, so impactful?
That's a great question. Remember, we're talking about early 19th century India, a time of immense change and upheaval. British influence was expanding rapidly, and traditional Indian society was undergoing a period of intense transformation. There were new ideas swirling around, new technologies emerging, and a growing sense of discontent with the existing social and political order.
So in a way, Raja Rammohan Roy was a product of his times, but he was also shaping those times, pushing for changes that he felt were necessary for India to progress.
Exactly. He was both a reflection of the changing times and a catalyst for further change.
Yeah.
He saw the challenges and opportunities presented by the encounter between East and West, between tradition and modernity, and he sought to navigate this complex landscape in a way that would benefit India and its people.
I think that's what makes his story so compelling, so relevant even today. He was grappling with issues that we still face today. The tension between tradition and modernity, the struggle for social justice, the role of religion in a rapidly changing world.
It's all still relevant.
He was ahead of his time in many ways.
He was.
His ideas about religious tolerance, social equality, and the importance of education resonate with us even now more than 2 centuries later.
He truly was a visionary figure, a pioneer who helped lay the foundation for modern India. And his story is a reminder that one person can make a difference.
Yeah.
That even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, it's possible to fight for a better future.
Well, on that inspiring note, I think it's time we move on to the final segment of our deep dive, where we'll explore the specific impacts of Raja Rammohan Roy's work on various aspects of Indian society.
Sound good.
What do you say? Are you ready to unpack the legacy of this extraordinary individual?
Let's do it.
All right, welcome back to the deep dive. As we wrap up our exploration of Raja Rammohan Roy, I'm struck by the sheer breadth of his impact. It's like he touched upon every facet of Indian society. Religion, education, social reform, politics.
Yeah, you name it.
His influence is undeniable.
It really is.
He really laid the groundwork for what we now call the Indian Renaissance, a period of intense intellectual and social ferment that ultimately led to India's independence movement.
That's right.
So let's unpack that legacy a bit. Where do you think his influence was most profoundly felt?
Oh, that's a tough one. Each area is interconnected, but I'd say his efforts in education were particularly transformative. He had this vision of creating a new generation of Indians equipped to navigate a rapidly changing world.
We've talked about the institutions he established, the Hindu college, the Anglo-Hindu school, the Vedanta college. These weren't just about imparting knowledge. They represented a whole new way of thinking about education.
Exactly. He challenged the traditional rote learning methods, emphasizing critical thinking, scientific inquiry, and exposure to new ideas from the West. He saw the value in blending Western science and philosophy with Indian traditions, creating a more holistic and modern approach to education.
And what was the long-term impact of this educational revolution?
Well, it led to the emergence of a new class of intellectuals who were exposed to a wider range of perspectives. They were able to engage in critical discourse, question traditional norms, and ultimately play a crucial role in shaping India's future.
And it's fascinating to see how his emphasis on women's education fits into this broader vision.
Yeah.
He saw it as essential, not just for individual empowerment, but for the progress of society as a whole.
Absolutely. He understood that educating women wasn't just about giving them opportunities. It was about uplifting entire communities and strengthening the nation. It was a radical idea for the time and one that continues to resonate today.
Now, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about his contributions to social reform.
Okay.
His campaign against Sati was obviously a landmark achievement.
It was.
But his work went far beyond that.
His advocacy for women's rights was truly comprehensive. He championed widow remarriage, challenging centuries-old traditions that often condemned widows to a life of isolation and hardship. He also fought for their right to property and inheritance, pushing back against patriarchal norms that denied them economic independence.
And he wasn't afraid to address issues like child marriage, which was quite prevalent at the time.
No, he saw these practices as unjust and harmful, and he spoke out against them, even when it meant facing intense opposition from conservative forces.
So he's challenging social norms, advocating for women's rights, revolutionizing education, and we can't forget his contributions to religious discourse in India.
His impact on religious thought was profound. He challenged the rigid orthodoxy of his time, advocating for a more rational and inclusive approach to faith. His emphasis on monotheism, his critique of empty rituals, and his efforts to find common ground between Eastern and Western religious traditions were incredibly forward-thinking.
His attempt to integrate Christian ethics into Indian traditions, as seen in his book Precepts of Jesus, was particularly controversial, wasn't it?
It was. It sparked debate and resistance from both Hindu and Christian communities. But it also highlights his commitment to interfaith dialogue and his belief in the possibility of finding unity amidst diversity.
It seems like everything he did was aimed at pushing India towards a more progressive future, a future where reason, social justice, and individual empowerment were paramount.
That's a great way to put it. He was a true visionary, a man ahead of his time who dared to imagine a better India and worked tirelessly to make that vision a reality.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to emphasize that Raja Rammohan Roy's story isn't just about dates and facts. It's a story about the power of ideas, the courage to challenge the status quo, and the enduring impact one individual can have on the course of history.
His legacy continues to inspire us today, reminding us that we all have a role to play in shaping a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening who are preparing for the UPSC exams, remember that understanding Raja Rammohan Roy's contributions is crucial for grasping the broader context of modern Indian history.
He was a pivotal figure in shaping the trajectory of modern India, and his ideas continue to resonate in contemporary debates about religion, social reform, and the meaning of progress.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future, just as Raja Rammohan Roy did. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the deep dive with your fellow history enthusiasts. We'll be back soon with another fascinating deep dive into a topic that's sure to get your thinking.